But it shows that because we expect the shoes to last 3 months longer than average, it is in the end a shoe with a lower footprint than the other shoes that we researched. That was very interesting that long lifespan is such an important strategy in terms of sustainability.
Speaking of sustainability, a podcast where we talk to frontrunners, innovators, and business specialists on, well, sustainability and where they think their industries are headed, and more importantly, how they can make them more sustainable.
Hi there, this is Hani Larma from Ecochain, and in today's conversation, I'm speaking to Iris van Wanrooij, the Sustainability Manager at Emma Safety Footwear. We talk about how they measure their environmental footprint of their products, how they choose the materials they use, and where the footwear industry is headed in terms of sustainability. Stay tuned. So, hi Iris, thank you so much for joining me in our talk today.
Hello. Well, thank you so much for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. And I think what would be nice to start off with is if you could shortly introduce yourself and what you do at Emma Safety Footwear.
So my name is Iris. I'm working at Emma Safety Footwear since early 2018. And I'm responsible for the sustainability program. And for us, it means working on more sustainable materials, but also on the conditions in our supply chain, as well as communications around sustainability. We have a take back program. Of course, the people working in our own factory, as we do have an own factory here in the Netherlands. So it's quite a diverse program.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting job you have there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Emma Safety Footwear is a client of us, so I
Mhm.
know a little bit about your sustainability journey. But what I would find really interesting to know about is actually how did you decide to measure the impact of your footwear products?
Well, we started with sustainability around 2015. Emma was founded as part of the first social enterprise of the Netherlands. So it has been a sheltered workplace for people with disabilities. So, in that sense, social entrepreneurship is really in the DNA of our organization. And then sustainability was quite a logical next step to take in 2015. And we did realize that we were using quite a lot of valuable resources to make our products, and we wanted to know the impact of these materials and of our production processes because we wanted to know where we could improve, and we didn't really have insights into the hotspots of our supply chain, including the end of life phase.
Mhm.
And we wanted to know how we could change the design process in such a way that we could improve our footprint.
Yeah, really nice. And for anyone listening who might not know what the hotspots are, that's the environmental impact that has the most impact. And were there any kind of surprises that came along when you did start to measure something maybe that you didn't expect to have a really big hotspot or something that came out in that measurement?
Well, what we didn't realize is that the impact in terms of global warming potential for transport was really low. It
Okay.
was less than 2% of our full supply chain. So that was interesting because, well, back in the days, we produced the full shoes ourselves in the Netherlands in the 80s. Part of the shoe production has been outsourced to Brazil and
Mhm.
China as well. And it was interesting to see that it didn't have that much of an effect on our full supply chain. And also, what was interesting to me is that as we do have a take back program with a competitor, we realized that even though you have reverse logistics in place, the impact of recycling shoes could be a really great potential scenario. So, in case customers want to return their shoes, they can save up to 4 kilograms of CO2, and that was quite a high number, I would say. So we wanted to know the difference in the scenario in terms of recycling and incineration, and it showed that it is beneficial to do so.
Oh, that's really interesting. And so, why do you think the impact was lower in the transport than you imagined?
Well, honestly, I didn't have a number in mind before we started the analysis, but I do get a lot of questions from clients that state, well, you're working on sustainability, but you're still producing partly in Brazil. So that was something just that I wanted to know, and I expected it to be higher
Yeah.
because I get that question that often, but it turned out to be that low.
Yeah.
So our impact is mainly with the production of leather,
Mm.
with the production of steel, and also with the production of polyurethane. And that also means that quite well a high impact is with our own organization because we produce soles from polyurethane in our own factory.
Right.
So that was also interesting to know, how the impact is distributed throughout the
Yeah.
supply chain.
Definitely. And I think that kind of goes to show that, even though we have assumptions on what we think has a really high impact, or maybe things that in general maybe have been highlighted in the media, transport, for example, although they're really also, of course, important things to keep in mind, it is only through the measurements that you really find those true hotspots and what should I firsthand be working on.
Exactly, and it's also quite a difficult exercise because what are you focusing on? Because in this case, it was climate change, so a global warming potential. So we didn't really zoom in on other impact categories.
Mhm.
And then it could also be relevant to zoom in on your transport again. So it's not an easy task. But so we are very helpful very grateful that you wanted to help us in this respect. So we could make use of your software so we can also see the impact in different categories.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because I think, like you said, you've taken one step towards something and there's still a lot of continuous improvement. Sustainability is never one day to another thing. It's about constantly looking and seeing what can be improved and how the company changes as well, what you need to focus on changes. So that's also,
Well, yes, and that is really key because what we have analyzed also is future scenarios. So what if we would change a toe cap from a steel toe cap to a composite toe cap, and what is the actual difference in environmental impact in the production of these toe caps then? So, and that was just one material. So there are of course many materials that you need to produce a shoe. So it was very interesting to research all these different scenarios. And also, what find remarkable was that the importance of lifespan was this big. So I already knew, investing in a long lifespan, of course, is important. But what was interesting is that for one style that we researched, is that we produce a TPU counter to extend the lifespan, and it's a long lasting material. It's a very durable material, but of course you need energy to produce this additional component. But it shows that because we expect the shoes to last 3 months longer than average, it is in the end a shoe with a lower footprint than the other shoes that we researched. That was very interesting, that long lifespan is such an important strategy in terms of sustainability.
right. And I think that perfectly what you said also is an example of how there's not one way to be sustainable. One of my colleagues always says when you're looking at the life cycle, you're kind of making this like recipe of different materials and different processes, and you
Yes.
make this whole product. And depending on what the goal of the recipe, what the outcome should be, there's different choices that you make in the materials or the processes. And those all kind of connect together and make that end goal. So for you, if it was extending the lifespan, you make different choices also within materials and that type of thing as well.
Yeah, and then you sort of justify the extra use of energy, and then of course you motivate the supplier to use more renewable energy to lower their footprint. But then you know what to focus on, and therefore this LCA is really valuable.
Yeah, really interesting. And have your design guidelines or your choices for how you choose materials or processes, has that evolved over time?
Yes, because what we saw in your analysis is that renewable energy could significantly decrease our emissions. So we invested in green electricity certificates, so guarantees of origin, for example. And also we researched the impact of leather versus so-called vegan leathers
Okay.
and microfiber, and also a new type of tanning. And now we are still working on this development with a supplier that has this new type of leather with this, yeah, well, new type of tanning, where they don't use any chromium anymore, and or any heavy metals. And that actually showed in your analysis that that material has the lowest footprint of the materials that we researched. And then we know, this material is really interesting for us to use compared to other materials with comparable performance. So that was really valuable knowledge for our design department.
That's really interesting. And of course, you were kind of touching upon the alternative materials and looking at the different options and weighing out the environmental impact of that. I've recently been seeing in the media a lot that there is a lot of talk about these alternative materials and what could possibly be innovated and what's already out there. And there's a lot of talk about this, especially in the apparel industry. What do you think this means for the footwear industry in general? Where is it headed in terms of sustainability?
Well, what I do hope in this area that we will have the product category rules for safety footwear and that we can all work with the same data and then we can make really great comparisons among footwear producers and then we can share knowledge and then we can really make a difference also together because then we would have way more insights into those materials and processes and we can make fair comparisons. So I would say that would be a great evolution. And we are currently working with you also on environmental product declarations and then you can also have an external body evaluating the results. And at the moment it's not possible yet because these product category rules are not there yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the EU, I know, is working on also these eco design guidelines, and there is a lot happening. It's just, as you said, it's not in place yet. But I
Mhm.
think that's also a really interesting one if there's more, yeah, of these kind of laws in place. And unfortunately, I think companies often need that to really start working within those boundaries as well. So I think that
Yes.
that's a really interesting
Yeah,
topic.
of course, because it's still a challenge to get the data from your suppliers.
Yeah.
But the more real data you have, the more interesting your analysis becomes, of course. And then you can just start your conversation with your suppliers and see where they can also make their major improvements.
Right. It's also a kind of snowball effect, and I think that that can, in a positive way, also encourage this knowledge sharing maybe among companies about
Yes,
best
absolutely.
practices and those best alternative materials, and I think that that will be a really positive development, hopefully. And you already mentioned a little bit your take back pilot of the used footwear
Yeah.
that you're doing. What have been some of the learnings so far that you've gotten throughout this program?
Hmm. I would say the first learning that we had was there was no real reverse logistics in place yet when we started. Now, other companies have also stepped in there, which is a great development. Second, we also realized that we need a lot of volume, and therefore we need other producers also to work with us in these projects because, of course, the companies that want to produce products from these used materials, they also need to have quite an interesting volume to work with. So volume is really needed, and therefore cooperating with a competitor is maybe a bit odd. And it's still, of course, a bit of a conventional industry, but at the same time, you do see that other producers also want to take similar steps. And therefore, we have started this alliance together with one of our competitors.
Yeah.
So that was really important. Another thing is that it's not easy to separate these materials and it's quite contradictory because in a way you produce shoes to last longer, to be very of course safe, but also hard to deconstruct. And at the same time you want it to be recyclable and also you want to take them apart at the end of life stage. So it's really also a different way of thinking. It's a new system that we are working with. And that makes it a challenge because you would say you would change design processes, but you also need to comply also with safety regulations. We have the PPE restrictions. So PPE stands for personal protective equipment. There's a lot of things that we need to take into account.
Right.
And then also, of course, you need to find partners that are able to process used safety shoes. We use quite a lot of heavy materials, for example, a toe cap and a steel sole plate that are not easy to shredder. So you need to have tough machines that can easily take these materials. And you have different densities. So you need to have different separation steps next to each other. So it's not like you can just throw in a shoe in one machine and it comes out in different material streams. It's you
Yeah.
actually need to have different steps and different machines in order to separate the materials. So it's also a process, and it's a really interesting journey that we started, and therefore it's also still in pilot phase. But we have found some good partners that are really experts in chemical engineering, for example, in business development, in the production of new materials from residual streams. So we do get quite a lot of help, and that is also really just really needed because, well, my colleagues are really experts in producing shoes, but not so much in the recycling processes. I'm really grateful that we can do this together, with my colleagues at the company, but also with our competitor, and that we can share knowledge not only in terms of the recycling process, but also in terms of design for disassembly, for example.
Yeah, really nice. And I think you said so many interesting things here that I want to touch upon. But one of them, I think, which is really interesting that you pointed out, is that when you're doing something that is meant to last for a really long time and it needs to be very durable, but it also needs to be easily recyclable, there's a lot of yeah, tough things there to sort out. And I think it's really great that you have started that mindset shift and trying to kind of think about how you can do that already from the beginning of the design phase, how you can
Mhm.
incorporate indeed that eco design factor into already the beginning before it's even being produced. So I think that that's a really interesting challenge that you're now having to
Yeah.
deal with, overcome. And I think that's great that you're working on that, and also that you're involving competitors, because that's kind of been a theme that I've noticed during these podcast interviews that I've been doing with people, that I think in the end, people do want to collaborate. They want their competitors to also join forces in sustainability. It's something we all need to take part in, and it's not, one company doing 100%. It's all
You
of
have
them
a common
doing
mission.
their best.
Yeah.
So that's a really really great to hear that you're also working on that together. I recently read an interesting article. It was in Vogue Business, which was talking about a study that they were doing in, I think there was around 260 different brands that they were looking into, of apparel brands. And the study was about their sustainability efforts and what they're doing now, in terms of efforts that they, yeah, as companies are trying to do in terms of environmental sustainability. And one of the key findings of that study, I'm going to read a small quote, was
Mhm.
the key findings center around recycled materials and land use for new material production, encouraging brands to build resilient matrix approach to material sourcing. So yeah, I'm curious to hear from you. Is land use and this recycling of your old footwear products, is that something that you think is kind of the future for you, or what's next in your sustainability journey?
Well, we do use some recycled materials already, and I would like to increase this percentage. Also, at the same time, keeping an eye on the long lifespan and comfort. We always say actually safety goes first, then comfort, and then sustainability. Otherwise, you're just producing a shoe that nobody would like to wear, and then it's not sustainable after all.
Yeah.
So if we can implement more recycled materials or materials with a lower footprint, that would be really preferred. What we also pay attention to is, for example, restricted substances, that they are below the limit that we have set for the suppliers, and also mono materials and less components to make the dismantling process a bit easier. And I think, yeah, using recycled materials is in a way also, yeah, a way to protect the land use. So, of course, we also are looking into ways to recycle our own materials, but at the moment it's still in research phase.
Yeah.
So that would be a great potential development. But at the same time, we're also being realistic because again, then you would need to have, yeah, well, serious volumes sometimes to justify the investments also. So where it makes sense, we would like to use it in our own products, but in some cases, it's just more logical to produce it in other industries.
Interesting. Well, we're already at the end of our interview. So one last question that I always
Sure.
ask everybody. So
hmm
that is, what are some other people, organizations, or companies that inspire you in terms of what they do to make our economy and society more sustainable?
To me, Patagonia is a really great example, as they are really transparent about their operations. For example, they publish their production locations, and they were one of the first who came up with this ad of don't buy this jacket to actually reduce consumption. Because, of course, now you hear a lot of news on the rebound effects also of circularity and sustainability. And yeah, they realized it in a quite an early stage. And of course, they have also many more sustainable materials in their products. And I think, yeah, they're just being a great example for the apparel industry. Well, in the apparel industry, you now see a development around extended producer responsibility here in the Netherlands. And that would be also something really interesting, we think, for the safety shoe industry.
Mhm.
So
Can
that
you explain a
everyone.
little what you mean by the extended responsibility?
Sure. So, what I would like to see also in the shoe industry is that producers are also becoming responsible for the products they sell in the market, so that they would also need to arrange recycling schemes or reuse programs, or they need to pay a fee that can be used for the recycling processes. That we would work towards such a model for every shoe producer to create an equal playing field. That would be a fantastic development.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Iris. This was really interesting, and I got a really good glimpse into what it's like for safety footwear to become sustainable. So, very
Thank you
great.
so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for watching this chat. If you enjoyed this episode, please click here to subscribe or here for more recent episodes. Bye bye.